The autumn rain hammered against the cracked pavement of downtown Seattle, turning the streets into rivers of reflected neon and despair. Beneath the faded green awning of what used to be Morrison's hardware store, a young woman sat huddled against the brick wall, her cardboard sign propped carefully against her knees. The ink had started to run in the moisture, but the words were still legible: homeless veteran. Anything helps. God bless. Her name was Sarah Mitchell, though nobody bothered to ask anymore. At 28 years old, she looked both younger and infinitely older than her years, younger in the smoothness of her face, untouched by the wrinkles that comfort and routine provide, but older in her eyes, which held depths that most people spend lifetimes trying to avoid. Her dark hair, once kept in the regulation bun of a U.S. Army Ranger, now hung in tangled waves around her shoulders, stuffed partially under a worn baseball cap that had seen better days. She wore layers, a thin jacket over a hoodie over 2 t-shirts, not for fashion but for survival. November in Seattle wasn't forgiving, especially not to those without walls and roofs. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Sarah had been sitting in her usual spot for 3 hours, and her small coffee can held exactly $4.63. It wasn't much, but it was something. She'd learned to measure her days in small victories, a few dollars here, a sandwich there, a night when the rain held off long enough for her sleeping bag to stay dry. The grand ambitions that had once filled her head seemed like relics from another person's life now. She remembered the girl who'd stood in the recruitment office at 19, her eyes blazing with purpose, ready to serve her country and prove she was just as tough as any man. That girl had been so certain that the military would give her life structure, meaning, a brotherhood that would last forever. That girl had been wrong about a lot of things. The sound of laughter cut through the steady drumming of rain, and Sarah looked up to see 5 teenage boys approaching from down the street. They were probably 16 or 17, wearing expensive sneakers and designer jackets that wouldn't last 2 days on the streets before being stolen. They walked with that particular swagger that comes from never having to worry about where your next meal would come from never having to choose between eating and staying dry. Sarah had seen hundreds of kids like them over the past 6 months since she'd ended up on the streets. Some ignored her completely, averting their eyes as if homelessness might be contagious. Some offered genuine kindness, a few dollars, a granola bar, even just a smile. But others, like these boys, saw her as entertainment. "Dude, look at this," the tallest one said, his voice carrying that particular cruelty that teenage boys sometimes cultivate like a badge of honor. He had perfectly styled blonde hair that probably required more product than Sarah had used in the past year. Another beggar. This corner's like infested with them. His friends laughed, clustering around him like satellites around a planet. Sarah kept her eyes down, focusing on the cardboard sign, on the way the rain was slowly dissolving the H in helps. She'd learned that engagement usually made things worse. If you didn't react, if you just sat there like a piece of furniture, sometimes they'd get bored and move on. "Yo, check out the sign," another one chimed in, this one with dark hair gelled into spikes that defied both gravity and good taste. "Homeless veteran." "Yeah, right. She's like, what, 12? "She's definitely lying," a third boy added, pulling out his phone. "No way she was in the military. She probably just thinks people will give her more money if she says that." Sarah's jaw tightened, but she didn't look up. Her hands, resting on her knees, clenched into fists before she consciously relaxed them. Getting angry wouldn't help. Getting defensive wouldn't help. These kids had no idea what they were talking about, and nothing she could say would change their minds. They'd already decided who she was, a liar, a con artist, someone less than human who existed solely for their amusement. The tall blonde one crouched down, getting closer to Sarah's level, his phone out and recording. "Hey, fake soldier girl. What branch were you in? The Salvation Army?" His friends erupted in laughter, the sound echoing off the wet pavement and the empty storefronts. One of them, a stocky kid with a backwards cap, actually bent over, slapping his knee like this was the funniest thing he'd ever heard. The one with the spiked hair joined in the mockery, his voice dripping with sarcasm. I bet she couldn't even do a push-up. My little sister's in better shape than her. Sarah finally looked up, meeting the blonde kid's eyes. He had blue eyes, clear and uncomplicated, the eyes of someone who'd never seen anything that would haunt him in the dark. For just a moment, she considered telling him the truth. She could describe the dust of Kandahar province, the weight of 60 pounds of gear in 120-degree heat, the sound of an IED explosion that leaves your ears ringing for 3 days. She could tell him about watching her team leader bleed out in her arms while waiting for a medevac that came 5 minutes too late. She could explain about the traumatic brain injury from the blast that left her with migraines so severe she sometimes couldn't see, about the PTSD that made it impossible to hold down a job because she'd hit the ground at any loud noise, about the VA's endless waiting lists and bureaucratic mazes that made getting help feel like fighting another war. But she didn't say any of that. Instead, she just stared at him, her expression neutral, until he started to feel uncomfortable under the weight of her gaze. There was something in her eyes that made him shift his weight, made the laughter die in his throat just a little. It was the look of someone who'd seen things, who'd done things, who'd survived things that would break most people. Whatever, he muttered, standing up. But he didn't move away. None of them did. They were committed now, their egos invested in the performance for each other and for whoever would watch the video later. The tall one gestured at her sign with his foot, not quite kicking it but coming close. So what's your story, fake vet? Let me guess, you need money for food, right? Not drugs or alcohol, definitely just food. Jake, man, ask her what she did in the military, the stocky one urged. I want to hear this story. Bet it's hilarious. Sarah looked at the boy called Jake, really looked at him. 17, maybe 18. Probably a senior in high school. Probably had college applications in, probably had parents who loved him in a bedroom that was his alone and 3 meals a day without even thinking about it. Probably had never had to fight for anything real in his entire life. I was a ranger, she said quietly. Her voice was rough from disuse, she sometimes went whole days without speaking to anyone. 75th Ranger Regiment. 3 deployments to Afghanistan. The silence that followed was brief but potent. Then Jake laughed again, but there was less certainty in it now. Yeah, okay. Sure you were. Rangers are like elite special forces or whatever. They don't end up homeless on street corners. You'd be surprised, Sarah replied, her voice steady despite the tremor she felt inside. A lot of us do. The boy with spiked hair leaned in, emboldened by Jake's continued mockery. Prove it then. If you're really a ranger, prove it. Show us some military ID or whatever. Sarah's hand moved to her jacket pocket, and for a moment, the boys tensed. You never knew what someone might pull out on the streets. But she just retrieved a battered military ID card, the plastic scratched and worn but still readable. She held it up, and Jake snatched it from her hand before she could react. Specialist Sarah Mitchell, he read aloud, squinting at the card in the dim light. Says Army right here. Doesn't say anything about Rangers. Rangers don't get special ID cards, Sarah explained, her patience wearing thin. It's a unit designation, not a rank. But I have proof. She shouldn't engage. Every instinct she developed over 6 months on the streets told her to shut up, to let them have their fun and leave. But something in her, some last ember of pride from the woman she used to be, wouldn't let it go. Before she could second-guess herself, she pulled up the sleeve of her jacket, then her hoodie, then the t-shirt underneath. The tattoo on her upper right shoulder was faded but unmistakable, the tan beret and distinctive Ranger scroll, with RLTW underneath. Rangers lead the way. The unit's motto. She'd gotten it after completing Ranger school, one of only a handful of women who'd made it through the grueling 61 days of hell. It had meant everything to her then, that tattoo. It was proof that she belonged, that she'd earned her place among the best. Now it was just a reminder of everything she'd lost. The laughter stopped. All 5 boys stared at the tattoo, their expressions shifting from mockery to confusion to something that might have been shame. Jake's mouth opened and closed like a fish pulled from water. The stocky one actually took a step back. The one with spiked hair looked down at his expensive sneakers, suddenly finding them fascinating. "That's..." Jake started, his voice lacking its earlier confidence. "That's a real Ranger tattoo." "Yes," Sarah said simply, pulling her sleeve back down. The November air bit at her exposed skin, and she shivered. "It is." The mood had shifted entirely. The boys looked at each other, uncertain now, the power dynamic completely reversed. They'd come here to mock someone they saw as beneath them, to score some viral video content and feel superior. Instead, they'd been confronted with the uncomfortable reality that the world was more complicated than their privileged bubbles had led them to believe. The stocky one started, but whatever apology he might have formed died on his lips. Sarah didn't want their apologies anyway. Apologies were cheap, easier to give than change. "You should go," Sarah said quietly, turning her attention back to her cardboard sign. "Go home to your warm houses and your families and forget you ever saw me." But Jake didn't move. He was still holding her military ID, turning it over in his hands as if the plastic might offer answers to questions he hadn't known to ask. His friends were already backing away, ready to flee the uncomfortable situation, but something kept him rooted in place. 3 deployments, he said finally. That's a lot." Sarah didn't respond. She'd said enough. Every word cost energy she couldn't spare, calories she didn't have to burn. The rain was picking up again, and she needed to figure out where she'd sleep tonight. The shelter on 5th Avenue would be full by now, and the underpass where she sometimes crashed had been swept by police last week. Jake stood there for another long moment, the rain soaking through his expensive jacket while his friends called for him to hurry up. Finally, he set the military ID down carefully on top of Sarah's sign, like it was made of something precious and fragile. Then he pulled out his wallet, leather, probably cost more than Sarah had seen in months, and extracted what looked like all the cash inside. He didn't count it, just set it down next to the ID, weighted with a small rock so it wouldn't blow away. "I'm sorry," he said, and for the first time, he sounded like he meant it. "I'm really sorry." Then he turned and jogged after his friends, leaving Sarah alone again with the rain and her thoughts. She picked up the military ID with trembling fingers, slipping it back into her pocket where it lived next to the few other remnants of her old life, dog tags, a photo of her unit, a Purple Heart she'd earned for injuries sustained in combat. Then she counted the money Jake had left. $63. Combined with what was already in her can, she had enough for 2 nights at the cheap motel on Aurora Avenue, the one that didn't ask questions and took cash. 2 nights with a real bed, a shower, a door that locked. 2 nights of safety. She should have felt grateful. She should have felt something other than the hollow numbness that had become her constant companion. Instead, she just felt tired. Tired of being a lesson for privileged kids. Tired of having to prove her worth, her service, her basic humanity. Tired of surviving when so many of her brothers and sisters hadn't made it home at all. Sarah tucked the money carefully into her boot, never keep it where someone could easily grab it, and gathered her few possessions. The rain was really coming down now, turning the streets into a maze of puddles and streams. She'd head to the motel, get a room, and try to silence the memories that always seemed louder when she was alone in the quiet. Tomorrow she'd be back here, back on this corner with her cardboard sign, waiting for the next set of people to decide whether she was worthy of their spare change or their contempt. But tonight, for 2 nights, she'd have walls and a roof. It wasn't much, but for someone like Sarah Mitchell, former Army Ranger and current ghost of the American dream, it was everything. The streets of Seattle blurred past as she walked, her backpack heavy with the weight of a life reduced to what you could carry. Other homeless people nodded to her as she passed. There was a community here, invisible to most, bound together by shared struggle. Miguel, who used to be a teacher until his wife died and he couldn't cope. Lisa, who'd aged out of foster care with nowhere to go. Tom, who'd worked construction until a fall left him with a back injury and no insurance. All of them warriors in their own way, fighting a war that most people pretended didn't exist. Sarah's footsteps echoed on the wet pavement, a lonely rhythm that matched her heartbeat. Behind her, the corner where she'd sat for hours was already empty, as if she'd never been there at all. In a few hours, the morning commuters would rush past without knowing that someone had knelt there, that a confrontation had occurred, that 5 boys had learned something about assumptions and reality. The city would move on, indifferent and eternal, while Sarah fought another day in a battle that had no clear enemy and no victory conditions. She thought about Jake's face when he'd seen the tattoo, the way his certainty had crumbled. Part of her felt bad for him. He was just a kid, after all, shaped by a society that taught him to look down on people like her. But another part, the part that had survived firefights and IED blasts and the slow death of bureaucratic indifference, felt no sympathy at all. He'd get to go home and forget. He'd get to feel good about his moment of charity and move on with his comfortable life. Sarah would still be here, still fighting, still invisible. The motel sign flickered in the distance, a beacon of temporary refuge in the storm. She picked up her pace, eager to get out of the rain, to shed these wet clothes, to stand under hot water until the chill in her bones began to thaw. 2 nights. 48 hours of being something other than street furniture, something other than a cautionary tale or an object of pity. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough. But it was what she had, and Sarah Mitchell, former Army Ranger, had learned long ago that you fought with what you had, not with what you wished for. You survived another day, and then another, and you didn't think too hard about why or for what purpose. Survival itself became the mission, and missions were something she understood. The rain followed her all the way to the motel, as if the sky itself was weeping for all the lost soldiers who'd come home only to find themselves without a home at all. Sarah didn't look back. She never looked back. There was nothing behind her but ghosts and regrets, and neither would keep her warm tonight. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new humiliations, new small victories and defeats. But tonight, she had a door that locked and a bed that was hers alone. For a warrior without a war, it was the closest thing to peace she could find. The motel clerk barely looked up as she paid for 2 nights in cash, sliding the key across the counter with the bored efficiency of someone who'd seen it all. Room 17. Sarah climbed the external stairs, her boots leaving wet prints that would dry by morning, erasing even this small evidence of her passage. The key turned in the lock with a satisfying click, and she stepped inside, closing the door on the world and its judgments. For 2 nights, she could pretend she was someone else. Someone who had a place in the world. Someone who mattered. But the tattoo on her shoulder, hidden beneath layers of wet fabric, knew the truth. Rangers lead the way, it declared. But where were they supposed to lead when the way itself had disappeared, when the path home had been erased, when the nation they'd served had no place for them anymore? Sarah didn't have an answer. She just had tonight, and tomorrow night, and the day after that. She'd be back on her corner with her cardboard sign, waiting for the next person to decide what she was worth. It was a war of a different kind, but it was the only war she had left to fight. The hot water ran brown at first, rust and neglect mixing with the rain Sarah washed from her hair. She stood under the spray until it ran clear, until her skin turned pink, until the cold that had settled into her bones began to retreat. The motel bathroom was small and shabby, with cracked tiles and a mirror spotted with age, but to Sarah, it was a palace. She had privacy. She had heat. She had water that came from a tap instead of a public fountain. She stayed in the shower until her fingers pruned, until the small water heater began to give out and the temperature dropped. Only then did she step out, wrapping herself in the thin towel the motel provided. Her reflection in the mirror startled her, as it always did on the rare occasions she had access to one. The woman staring back looked haggard, her cheekbones too prominent, her eyes too hollow. There were shadows beneath those eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and endless vigilance. On the streets, you never really slept, you dozed, you rested, but you never fully let your guard down. Sarah ran her fingers through her wet hair, working out the tangles as best she could. She'd cut it herself a few weeks ago with a pair of dull scissors, hacking away the length when it had become too difficult to manage. The result was uneven and unflattering, but vanity was a luxury she couldn't afford. Everything came down to survival, comfort, appearance, dignity. All of it was secondary to making it through another day. She laid out her wet clothes across the radiator, hoping they'd dry by morning. Then she dug through her backpack for the cleanest clothes she had, a pair of sweatpants with holes in the knees and a t-shirt that had once been white but was now a dingy gray. They weren't much, but they were dry, and right now, that was everything. The bed called to her, its thin mattress and scratchy sheets suddenly looking like the height of luxury. Sarah sat on the edge, feeling springs protest beneath her weight. Through the thin walls, she could hear a couple arguing in the next room, the sound of a television turned up too loud, the gurgle of old pipes. The sounds of life, of people existing in their own struggles and dramas. It was strange how much she'd missed being around walls and roofs, how the constant exposure of street life wore on you in ways you didn't realize until you had shelter again. She thought about the boys, about Jake's face when he'd seen her tattoo. The whole interaction felt surreal now, like something that had happened to someone else. Sarah had gotten used to being invisible, to being a problem people stepped around or a charity case they occasionally acknowledged. Being seen, really seen, was jarring. It reminded her that underneath the layers of dirt and desperation, she was still a person with a history, with skills, with a story worth telling. Not that her story had a happy ending. Not yet, anyway. Sarah lay back on the bed, staring at the water-stained ceiling. Tomorrow she'd need to make this money last. 2 nights in the motel would eat up most of what Jake had given her, but she'd need food too. Maybe she could stretch it to 3 nights if she was careful, if she bought ramen and bread instead of real meals. Every decision was a calculation, a balancing act between immediate needs and future survival. Her mind drifted, as it often did, to Afghanistan. To the desert heat and the weight of her rifle. To the faces of her unit, Martinez with his terrible jokes, Johnson who could fix anything with duct tape and prayer, Lieutenant Chin who led from the front and never asked them to do anything she wouldn't do herself. Most of them had made it home. Most of them had transitioned back to civilian life successfully, had used their GI Bill benefits and VA loans to build new lives. Some had struggles, sure, every combat veteran carried scars, visible and invisible. But they'd managed. Sarah hadn't. The traumatic brain injury from the IED blast had been the beginning of the end. The migraines came without warning, blinding pain that left her incapacitated for hours or days. The PTSD made it impossible to hold down a job. She'd tried, God knows she'd tried, but the flashbacks and panic attacks always got in the way. She'd been fired from 3 jobs in 4 months before she stopped trying. The VA appointments were months apart, the medication they prescribed barely touched the symptoms, and the therapy waiting list was so long it felt like a cruel joke. Her savings had run out first. Then her apartment. Then her car. Each loss felt like another step down a staircase with no bottom. She'd stayed with friends for a while, bouncing from couch to couch, but you can only impose on people's generosity for so long before it wears thin. Eventually, she'd found herself on the streets with a backpack and the clothes on her back, another casualty of a system that was supposed to take care of its veterans but so often failed them. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. A sharp pain lanced through Sarah's head, and she squeezed her eyes shut, recognizing the warning signs of an oncoming migraine. She fumbled in her backpack for her medication, expired ibuprofen that barely helped but was better than nothing. She dry-swallowed 4 pills and lay very still, breathing slowly, trying to will the pain away before it could fully take hold. The migraine came anyway, as they always did. The room tilted and spun, and Sarah gripped the edges of the mattress like it was a life raft in stormy seas. Colors bloomed behind her closed eyelids, fractal patterns of agony that pulsed in time with her heartbeat. Sound became unbearable, the arguing couple next door, the television, even the hum of the radiator felt like nails driven into her skull. She wrote it out the only way she knew how, by retreating into herself, by going to that place in her mind where the pain couldn't quite reach. It was a technique she'd learned in ranger school, during the worst of the physical trials when her body screamed for her to quit. You could separate yourself from the suffering, observe it from a distance without being consumed by it. It didn't make the pain go away, but it made it survivable. Hours passed. Or maybe minutes. Time lost meaning in the depths of a migraine. Sarah was dimly aware of the room growing darker as night fell fully, of the sounds in the motel shifting from the chaos of evening to the quieter desperation of late night. Eventually, mercifully, the pain began to recede, leaving her wrung out and exhausted but functional. She opened her eyes to darkness. The digital clock on the nightstand read 11:47 p.m. She'd lost nearly 5 hours to the migraine. Sarah sat up slowly, testing her body's responses, making sure the worst had passed. Her head still ached, a dull throb that might last for days, but it was manageable. She could function. Hunger gnawed at her stomach, she hadn't eaten since a granola bar that morning. Sarah dug through her backpack and found half a sandwich she'd saved from 2 days ago. The bread was stale and the lunch meat probably questionable, but she ate it anyway, washing it down with water from the bathroom tap. Beggars couldn't be choosers, literally. She thought about Jake again, wondered what he was doing right now. Probably sleeping in a comfortable bed in a house where the refrigerator was always full and the electricity never got shut off. Probably already forgetting about the homeless veteran he'd mocked and then pitted. People like Jake, they could afford to forget. Their lives moved on, filled with school and friends and plans for the future. Sarah's life was stuck in an endless present, each day a repetition of the last, survival the only goal. But something had shifted in that encounter. Sarah felt it, a small spark of something she thought long dead. Anger, maybe. Or pride. Or just the refusal to be erased, to be reduced to a cardboard sign and a cup of coins. She'd been someone once. She'd done things that mattered, had served her country with honor and distinction. That version of herself still existed somewhere underneath the layers of trauma and hardship. Maybe it was time to try to find her again. Sarah didn't know how. The system that was supposed to help veterans like her was so broken, so overwhelmed, that navigating it felt impossible. But she'd done impossible things before. She'd made it through ranger school when everyone expected her to fail. She'd survived combat when the odds said she shouldn't. She'd made it 6 months on the streets when every statistic said homeless veterans didn't last that long. If she could survive all that, maybe she could survive this too. Maybe she could find a way back. The thought was fragile, easily crushed by the weight of reality. But it was there, a small flame in the darkness. Sarah held onto it as she lay back down, pulling the thin blanket over herself. Tomorrow she'd be back on her corner, back to the grinding reality of street life. But maybe, just maybe, she'd start looking for a way out. Not because some kid had given her money out of guilt, but because she deserved better. Because the woman who'd earned that ranger tattoo deserved better. Sleep came slowly, interrupted by the noises of the motel and the echoes of memories she couldn't quite silence. But when it finally claimed her, Sarah dreamed not of Afghanistan or IEDs or the faces of the dead, but of something simpler. She dreamed of a door that locked, a bed that was hers, a future that held something more than just another day of survival. It wasn't much. But for now, it was enough. Morning came too early, announced by thin sunlight filtering through threadbare curtains and the sound of traffic building on the street outside. Sarah woke with a start, her hand instinctively reaching for a weapon that wasn't there, a reflex from too many mornings waking to incoming fire. Her heart hammered in her chest as reality reasserted itself. She wasn't in Afghanistan. She was in a motel room in Seattle. She was safe, at least for now. The headache from last night's migraine lingered, a dull pressure behind her eyes, but it was manageable. Sarah sat up slowly, taking inventory of her body the way she'd been trained to do. Shoulders tight from sleeping on a real mattress after months of concrete and cardboard. Back aching but no worse than usual. Hands steady enough. She could function, and functioning was all that mattered. Her clothes had dried overnight, stiff and wrinkled but wearable. Sarah dressed quickly, efficient movements born from years of military routine. She caught her reflection in the bathroom mirror again and paused. The woman looking back at her seemed slightly different from last night, though she couldn't quite say how. Maybe it was the rest, however fitful. Maybe it was the shower. Or maybe it was that small spark of something, determination, hope, stubborn refusal to give up, that had kindled in the darkness. Sarah brushed her teeth with the travel toothbrush she'd gotten from a shelter 3 weeks ago, using toothpaste she'd squeezed from a hotel sample. She washed her face with the harsh motel soap, scrubbing away the grime that seemed to accumulate no matter how careful she was. Then she packed her few belongings back into her backpack with military precision, everything in its place, ready to move at a moment's notice. She had one more night paid for at the motel, which meant one more day to figure out her next move. The smart thing would be to go back to her corner, to spend the day collecting whatever donations she could to stretch her money further. But that spark from last night whispered other ideas. The VA hospital was only a few miles away. She'd given up on them months ago after endless appointments that led nowhere, but maybe it was time to try again. Maybe if she pushed harder, advocated for herself better, something would finally give. The thought was exhausting before she even started. The VA was a labyrinth of bureaucracy, of forms and waiting lists and doctors who saw hundreds of patients exactly like her. Getting help meant fighting through a system designed to wear you down, to make you give up. But Sarah had fought through worse. She checked out of the motel room, pocketing the key deposit refund. Every dollar mattered. The clerk, a different one from last night, didn't even look at her as she left. Back on the street, the morning air was crisp and clean after last night's rain. Seattle spread out before her, beautiful and indifferent, a city that contained both immense wealth and grinding poverty, often on the same block. Sarah started walking toward the VA hospital, her backpack heavy on her shoulders. The streets were busy with morning commuters, people rushing to jobs and lives that Sarah could barely remember having. She watched them pass, these citizens of a different world, and wondered if any of them had any idea what it was like to live on the margins. Probably not. Probably they saw homeless people as failures, as cautionary tales, as problems to be solved or ignored, but never as fully human. The walk took her through neighborhoods that shifted and changed like a patchwork quilt. Expensive coffee shops gave way to pawn shops and liquor stores. Gleaming condos towered over Section 8 housing. The city's inequality was on full display, impossible to ignore if you were paying attention. Most people weren't. Sarah passed other homeless individuals setting up their spots for the day. She recognized some of them and exchanged nods, a community of the invisible, acknowledging each other's existence even when the rest of the world wouldn't. There was old Eddie who claimed he'd been a stockbroker before the crash of 2008. There was Keisha with her shopping cart full of carefully sorted recyclables. There was Danny, a vet like Sarah, though he'd served in Iraq instead of Afghanistan. They all had stories, all had paths that had led them to this place. Most people never asked what those stories were. The VA hospital loomed ahead, a sprawling complex of buildings that somehow managed to look both imposing and run down at the same time. Sarah had been here dozens of times before, for appointments that accomplished nothing, for prescriptions that barely helped, for referrals to specialists with 6-month waiting lists. Each visit had chipped away at her hope a little more until there was nothing left but resignation. But today felt different. Maybe it was the memory of Jake's face when he'd seen her tattoo. Maybe it was having slept in a real bed for the first time in months. Maybe it was just stubborn pride refusing to let her fade away completely. Whatever it was, Sarah squared her shoulders and walked through the main entrance like she had every right to be there. The lobby was crowded with veterans in various states of distress. Some were elderly, Vietnam-era vets with canes and wheelchairs. Others were younger, Iraq and Afghanistan veterans like Sarah, their injuries less visible but no less real. There were men in business suits who'd managed to hold their lives together and men in tattered clothes who hadn't. The VA served them all, or tried to, within the constraints of limited funding and overwhelming demand. Sarah got in line at the reception desk, behind a middle-aged man arguing about a missed appointment. The receptionist looked exhausted already, and it wasn't even 9 a.m. Sarah waited patiently, using the time to rehearse what she'd say. She needed to be clear, concise, convincing. She needed to make them understand that she wasn't just another case file, another number in an overloaded system. She was a human being who'd served her country and now needed that country to serve her back. Next, the receptionist called, her voice flat with fatigue. Sarah stepped forward. "I need to speak with someone about my case. I'm not getting the help I need and I'm homeless and I can't keep living like this." The receptionist, whose name tag read Patricia, looked up at her with eyes that had seen it all before. "Name and social security number?" Sarah provided the information, watching Patricia type it into the computer with practiced efficiency. The woman's expression didn't change as she scrolled through whatever was on the screen, but Sarah could imagine what she was seeing. Missed appointments because Sarah had been too sick or too disoriented to make them. Prescribed medications that hadn't been picked up because Sarah couldn't afford the copays. A file that probably screamed difficult case or non-compliant patient or whatever label they used for veterans who'd fallen through the cracks. "Your primary care physician is Dr. Rosen," Patricia said. "His next available appointment is December 15th. "That's over a month away," Sarah said, fighting to keep her voice level. "I need help now. I'm living on the streets. I have a traumatic brain injury and PTSD and I can't function. There has to be something sooner." Patricia's expression softened slightly, and for a moment, Sarah saw past the bureaucratic armor to the person underneath. "I understand, and I'm sorry. But we're severely backlogged. The best I can do is put you on the cancellation list. If someone cancels, you might get in sooner. What about emergency psychiatric services? Or the homeless veteran program?" Emergency psychiatric is for immediate crisis only, active suicidal ideation or psychosis. The homeless veteran program has a 3-month waiting list for intake appointments. Patricia pulled out a sheet of paper and started writing. "I'm going to give you some resources. There's a homeless veteran outreach coordinator who does street rounds on Tuesdays and Thursdays. There are shelters that specifically serve veterans. And there's a crisis hotline you can call 24/7. Sarah took the paper, looking at the list of phone numbers and addresses. She'd seen lists like this before. They were well-intentioned but often led nowhere, shelters that were always full, coordinators who were overwhelmed, hotlines where you waited on hold for an hour. But it was something. "Thank you," Sarah said, meaning it despite her frustration. Patricia was just doing her job within an impossible system. Getting angry at her wouldn't help anyone. "I wish I could do more," Patricia said quietly, and Sarah believed her. "The system is broken. We all know it's broken. But we're doing the best we can with what we have." Sarah nodded and turned to leave, but Patricia called her back. "Wait. There's one more thing." She wrote something else on the paper. "This is the number for a veterans advocacy group. They're volunteers, mostly, but they know how to navigate the system. They might be able to help you get services faster. It's worth a try." "Thank you," Sarah said again, this time with more feeling. It was a small thing, this extra phone number, but small things mattered when you had nothing. She left the VA hospital feeling simultaneously hopeful and defeated. Nothing had really changed, she still didn't have an appointment, still didn't have a concrete path forward. But she had information, and information was a kind of power. The advocacy group might be able to help. The outreach coordinator might have resources. It wasn't much, but it was more than she'd had yesterday. Sarah found a library branch a few blocks from the VA hospital and settled into a quiet corner with her new list of resources. The library was one of the few places in the city where homeless people could exist without being hassled, as long as they followed the rules and didn't cause trouble. Sarah had always followed the rules, even when the rules seemed designed to keep her down. She used one of the public computers to look up the veterans advocacy group Patricia had recommended. Their website was simple but informative, full of success stories and testimonials from veterans who'd gotten help. They offered free case management, assistance with VA claims, and advocacy for veterans struggling with the system. It almost seemed too good to be true, which made Sarah suspicious. She'd learned the hard way that things that seemed too good to be true usually were. But she had nothing to lose by calling. Sarah used her prepaid cell phone, the one she kept for emergencies and charged at public outlets whenever she could. The minutes were precious, each one costing money she didn't have, but this felt important enough to spend them on. The phone rang 3 times before someone picked up. Veterans Advocacy Network, this is Marcus speaking. How can I help you? The voice was warm and professional, and Sarah found herself relaxing slightly. Hi, I'm a veteran and I'm having trouble getting services through the VA. Someone at the hospital gave me your number. I'm glad they did. That's exactly what we're here for. Can you tell me a little about your situation? Sarah took a deep breath and launched into her story. It felt strange to articulate it all out loud, to string together the disconnected pieces of her downward spiral into a coherent narrative. She told Marcus about her service, her deployments, the IED blast and its aftermath. She explained about the TBI and PTSD, about the failed attempts to hold down jobs, about the slow slide into homelessness. She described the VA appointments that led nowhere, the medications that didn't work, the feeling of being trapped in a system that was supposed to help but instead just ground her down. Marcus listened without interrupting, making small sounds of acknowledgement that let Sarah know he was paying attention. When she finished, there was a brief pause before he spoke. Thank you for your service, Sarah. And I'm sorry the system has failed you so badly. What you're describing is unfortunately common, we see it all the time. But there are things we can do to help. First question, are you safe where you are right now? Do you have a place to stay tonight? I have one more night at a motel. After that, I'll be back on the streets. Okay. Let's work on changing that. I'm going to connect you with one of our case managers, Angela. She specializes in housing issues for homeless veterans. She can help you navigate the HUD VASH program, that's Housing and Urban Development and VA Supportive Housing. It's a voucher program specifically for homeless veterans. Sarah's heart skipped. I've tried applying for that before. They said the waiting list was years long. The waiting list can be long, yes, but Angela knows how to work the system. She knows which programs have openings, which ones have emergency provisions for veterans with service-connected disabilities, which ones can be expedited. It's her full-time job, and she's very good at it. Beyond housing, we can also help you with your VA disability claim. I see from your records, he paused, and Sarah heard typing, that you have a claim that's been pending for 8 months. That's unacceptable. We can put pressure on that, get it moving. How do you have access to my records? Sarah asked, surprised. You're going to sign a release form allowing us to advocate on your behalf. Once we have that, we can access your VA records, communicate with your providers, and generally make noise on your behalf. The VA responds better when there's an outside advocate involved. They know we know the system and we're not afraid to escalate issues if necessary. For the first time in months, Sarah felt something like hope stirring in her chest. What do I need to do? Can you come to our office this afternoon? Angela is here until 5. We'll get the paperwork started, do a full intake assessment, and create a plan of action. Our address is 1247, Madison Street, Suite 310. Do you know where that is? Sarah did, it was only a few miles from the library. I can be there. Perfect. How about 2 o'clock? That'll give Angela time to pull your records and prepare. 2 o'clock works, Sarah confirmed, her mind already planning the route. Sarah, Marcus said, his voice gentler now, I want you to know that this is going to take time. We're going to help you, but there's no magic wand that fixes everything overnight. It's going to be a process, and there will be frustrating moments. But you've already done the hardest part, you reached out. You asked for help. That takes courage, especially for someone who's been let down as many times as you have. Sarah's throat tightened unexpectedly. When was the last time someone had acknowledged her courage? When was the last time someone had seen her as more than a problem or a charity case? Thank you, she managed to say. See you at 2, Marcus replied, and the line went dead. Sarah sat in the library for a long moment, staring at the phone in her hand. This could be real. This could be the beginning of a way out. Or it could be another disappointment, another promise that led nowhere. She'd been burned too many times to fully believe, but that stubborn spark of hope refused to be extinguished. She spent the next few hours at the library, using the internet to research HUD VASH and other veteran housing programs. The more she read, the more possibilities emerged. There were transitional housing programs, rapid rehousing initiatives, supported living facilities specifically for veterans with PTSD and TBI. The resources existed, the trick was accessing them, and that's where advocates like Angela came in. At 1:30, Sarah gathered her things and left the library. The Veterans Advocacy Office was in a modest building in a mixed-use neighborhood, sharing space with a dentist's office and a small law firm. Sarah took the elevator to the 3rd floor, her nerves building with each ascending number. The office itself was unpretentious, a small waiting area with worn but comfortable chairs, walls covered with photos of veterans and commendations from various organizations. A receptionist greeted her warmly and let her know Angela would be right with her. Sarah had been sitting for less than 5 minutes when a woman emerged from one of the interior offices. She was in her 40s, with warm brown skin, gray-streaked hair pulled back in a neat bun, and eyes that radiated both competence and compassion. "Sarah Mitchell," she asked, extending her hand. "I'm Angela Torres. It's good to meet you." Sarah shook her hand, noting the firm grip. "Thank you for seeing me." "Of course. Come on back to my office and let's see what we can do to get you housed and get you the services you deserve." Angela's office was small but organized, with filing cabinets lining one wall and a desk covered with neat stacks of papers. She gestured for Sarah to sit in the chair across from her desk and settled into her own seat with the air of someone preparing for battle. "Marcus gave me a rundown of your situation," Angela said, pulling out a thick folder that Sarah realized was her VA file. "Former Army Ranger, 3 deployments to Afghanistan, TBI and PTSD from an IED blast, currently homeless. That about cover it?" "That's the summary, yes." "Okay. Let's start with the most immediate issue, housing. You said you have one more night at a motel, then you're back on the streets. We need to prevent that from happening. There's a transitional housing facility for women veterans that I work with closely. It's called Haven House. They have private rooms, case management services, mental health support, and they help residents work toward permanent housing. The usual wait list is 4 to 6 weeks, but I have a relationship with the director. Let me make a call." Angela picked up her phone and dialed without hesitation. Sarah listened as she spoke with someone named Patricia, a different Patricia from the VA, explaining Sarah's situation with a combination of facts and persuasion that was impressive to witness. The conversation lasted maybe 5 minutes, but by the end, Angela was smiling. "You're in luck," she said, hanging up. "They had a resident move into permanent housing yesterday, so they have an open bed. They can take you tonight if you can get there by 6. Sarah felt dizzy with the speed of it all. "Tonight? Really? Really? It's not permanent. The program is designed for stays of up to 6 months while we work on getting you into permanent supportive housing. But it's safe, it's clean, you'll have your own room, and you'll have access to services. It's a huge step up from the streets." "I don't know what to say." "Say yes," Angela replied with a grin. "Say yes, and then let's tackle the rest of this mess." Over the next hour, Angela walked Sarah through the Byzantine world of veteran services with the expertise of someone who'd navigated it hundreds of times before. They filled out applications for HUD VASH, for VA disability compensation, for various grant programs that could help with immediate needs. Angela explained each form, each program, making sure Sarah understood what she was signing and what the potential outcomes were. "Your disability claim has been stuck in pending status for 8 months, Angela said, scrolling through Sarah's VA records on her computer. "That's ridiculous. I'm going to file a formal inquiry and request an expedited review." With your service record and documented injuries, you should be getting disability compensation. That money could make a huge difference. Sarah watched Angela work, marveling at the woman's efficiency and knowledge. This was what she'd needed all along, someone who understood the system and wasn't afraid to fight it on her behalf. I'm also going to connect you with our mental health navigator, Angela continued. Her name is Dr. Patel, and she works specifically with veterans dealing with PTSD and TBI. She can't provide direct treatment, she's more of a coordinator, but she can get you connected with the right providers and make sure you're getting appropriate care. The VA's mental health services are overwhelmed, but there are also community providers who work with veterans. Dr. Patel knows all of them. This all seems too good to be true, Sarah admitted. I've been trying to get help for months and getting nowhere. Now in one afternoon, everything's falling into place? Angela's expression turned serious. It's not magic, Sarah. It's advocacy. The system is designed in a way that's hard to navigate alone, especially when you're dealing with PTSD and TBI and homelessness. But when you have someone who knows the shortcuts, who knows which buttons to push and which forms to file, doors start opening. That's what we do here, we level the playing field for veterans who've been failed by the system they served. Why do you do this? Sarah asked. I mean, it can't pay well, dealing with all this bureaucracy for people who can't afford to pay you. Angela smiled, a hint of sadness in it. My brother was a Marine. 2 tours in Iraq. He came home with PTSD and couldn't get the help he needed. He ended up on the streets for 3 years before he finally got into housing. Watching what he went through, watching him fight a system that should have been fighting for him, it changed me. When he finally got stable, I quit my job in corporate HR and started working in veteran advocacy. That was 12 years ago, and I've never regretted it. Is your brother okay now? He is. He's got his own place, he's working part-time, he's managing his symptoms. He's never going to be who he was before Iraq, that person doesn't exist anymore. But he's building a new life, a different life, and he's found some peace. That's all any of us can hope for, right? Not to go back to who we were, but to become someone new who can live with what we've been through. Sarah felt those words resonate deep in her chest. She'd spent so much time trying to get back to who she was before Afghanistan, before the blast, before everything fell apart. But maybe that wasn't the goal. Maybe the goal was to accept that she was different now and find a way to build a life that worked for this version of herself. I'm going to give you some information to take with you to Haven House, Angela said, returning to practical matters. She pulled out a folder and began filling it with papers. This has all your intake paperwork, information about the programs we discussed, and contact numbers for me, Dr. Patel, and Marcus. If you need anything, or if you hit any roadblocks, you call us immediately. Don't wait, don't try to handle it alone. That's what we're here for. She paused, looking directly at Sarah. I also want you to know that this process isn't always smooth. There will be setbacks. Paperwork will get lost. Appointments will get delayed. The VA will be frustrating. But we're going to keep pushing, and we're not going to let you fall back through the cracks. Okay? Okay, Sarah agreed, feeling the weight of commitment settling over her. She was agreeing to hope again, to try again, to believe that things could get better. It was terrifying. Angela printed out directions to Haven House and a letter of referral. The director's name is Patricia Chin, she's expecting you. You'll do an intake assessment tonight, get settled in your room, and meet with a case manager tomorrow morning. They'll set you up with a treatment plan and start working on your goals. It's structured, but not rigid. They understand that everyone's path to stability is different. Sarah took all the papers, carefully placing them in her backpack. It was strange to have a folder dedicated to her future, to have people actively working on her behalf. For months, she'd been alone in this fight. Now she had a team. One last thing, Angela said, reaching into her desk drawer. She pulled out a gift card. This is for the grocery store near Haven House. It's got $50 on it. Get yourself some basics, toiletries, snacks, whatever you need. Consider it a welcome gift. Sarah stared at the card, then at Angela. I can't. You can, and you will, Angela interrupted firmly. This is part of what we do. Getting housed is step one, but you also need to be able to take care of yourself. Don't argue with me on this. Sarah accepted the card with trembling fingers. Thank you. For everything. Angela stood and came around the desk, and for a moment, Sarah thought she might hug her. Instead, she placed a hand on Sarah's shoulder, a gesture of solidarity and support. You served your country with honor. Now let us serve you. That's how it's supposed to work. Sarah left the advocacy office in a daze, Angela's words echoing in her head. The afternoon sun was bright, the streets busy with people going about their lives, and for the first time in months, Sarah felt like she might have a place among them again. Not as the person she used to be, but as someone new, someone who'd survived the unsurvivable and was learning to live again. She had a few hours before she needed to be at Haven House, and she used the time to walk, to process, to begin to believe. She walked past her usual corner, the spot where she'd sat with her cardboard sign just yesterday. It seemed like a lifetime ago. She thought about Jake and his friends, about the moment when everything had shifted. In a way, they'd been a catalyst, forcing her to remember who she was beneath the layers of hardship and defeat. Sarah stopped at a coffee shop, a nice one she'd never dared enter before. She used some of Jake's money to buy a real coffee, hot and strong and topped with foam. She sat at a small table by the window and watched the world go by, allowing herself this small moment of normalcy. She was still homeless, technically, for a few more hours. But tonight she'd have a room. Tomorrow she'd have a case manager. Next week, maybe she'd have a treatment plan that actually worked. It wasn't a miracle. It was just advocacy, as Angela had said. But sometimes advocacy felt like a miracle when you'd been without it for so long. Sarah finished her coffee and gathered her things. It was time to head to Haven House, to take the next step in whatever this new journey was going to be. She didn't know what the future held, didn't know if she'd make it through the programs, didn't know if she'd ever fully heal from her invisible wounds. But she knew she was going to try. And for a woman who'd spent 6 months just trying to survive each day, the decision to try for something more felt revolutionary. Haven House sat on a quiet residential street in the Beacon Hill neighborhood, a converted craftsman-style home that had been renovated to serve as transitional housing for women veterans. Sarah stood on the sidewalk for a moment, taking it in. The house was painted a soft blue-gray with white trim, and the small front yard was neatly maintained. A sign by the door read Haven House, serving those who served, with an American flag decal beside it. It looked like a home. Not an institution, not a shelter, but an actual home. Sarah climbed the steps to the porch, her backpack suddenly feeling heavier than usual. This was the threshold, literally and figuratively. Once she walked through that door, she was committing to something. She was accepting help, accepting that she couldn't do this alone anymore, accepting that the version of herself that had prided itself on self-sufficiency and never asking for anything was gone. She rang the doorbell. The woman who answered was Asian American, probably in her late 50s, with kind eyes and an air of calm competence. "You must be Sarah," she said, stepping back to let her in. "I'm Patricia Chen, the director here." Angela called ahead. "Welcome to Haven House." The interior was warm and welcoming, with hardwood floors and walls painted in soothing neutrals. To the left was a living room with comfortable couches and a bookshelf filled with well-worn paperbacks. To the right was what looked like a dining room converted into a common space with tables and chairs. Everything was clean but lived in, a place where people actually resided rather than just passed through. "Let me give you a quick tour, then we'll get you settled," Patricia said. She led Sarah through the first floor, pointing out the kitchen where residents could prepare their own meals, the laundry room, a small office where case managers met with residents, and a peaceful sitting room with large windows overlooking a garden. "We have 8 rooms upstairs," Patricia explained as they climbed to the second floor. 7 are occupied right now, so you'll have 7 housemates. Most of them are working on transitioning to permanent housing, so there's good turnover. Some stay a few months, some stay the full 6. It depends on individual circumstances. She stopped at a door near the end of the hall. This is yours. Room 6. Patricia unlocked the door and stepped aside. Sarah walked in and felt her breath catch. It was small, maybe 10 by 12 feet, but it was private and it was clean. There was a twin bed with a real mattress and clean sheets, a dresser, a small desk with a lamp, and a window that looked out over the garden. The walls were a soft sage green, and there was even a small closet. The bathroom is shared, Patricia said, gesturing down the hall. You'll be sharing with 3 other women. We have a schedule posted for shower times, but everyone's pretty good about being considerate. There are also 2 half baths downstairs if the main bathroom is occupied. Sarah set her backpack down on the bed, hardly believing this space was hers. A room. A door that locked from the inside. A window with curtains. A bed that didn't involve sleeping on concrete or worrying about someone stealing her belongings while she dozed. I know it's not much, Patricia said gently, but... It's everything, Sarah interrupted, her voice thick with emotion. It's absolutely everything. Patricia smiled, understanding in her eyes. Let's go back downstairs and do the intake paperwork. Then you'll be free to settle in. Dinner is at 6:30 in the dining room. It's optional, but I encourage everyone to join when they can. Community meals are part of the healing process. The intake assessment was thorough but not invasive. Patricia asked about Sarah's service history, her current health situation, her goals for her time at Haven House. She explained the rules: no drugs or alcohol on the premises, no violence or threats of violence, participation in case management meetings, contribution to household chores. They were reasonable rules, designed to create a safe and stable environment for everyone. We're going to assign you a case manager tomorrow, Patricia said. Her name is Rebecca, and she's wonderful. She'll work with you to develop a personalized plan. That might include therapy referrals, job training, housing applications, medical care, whatever you need to get stable and eventually move into permanent housing. Angela mentioned Dr. Patel, the mental health navigator, Sarah said. Yes, Rebecca coordinates closely with Dr. Patel. They'll make sure you're getting the mental health support you need. Many of our residents deal with PTSD, TBI, or both. You're not alone in that struggle here. After the paperwork was complete, Patricia showed Sarah where supplies were kept: towels, toiletries, basic kitchen items. The gift card from Angela would let Sarah get her own preferred items, but Haven House provided the basics to get started. Patricia handed Sarah a key to her room and one to the main house. These are yours for as long as you're here, she said. This is your home now, Sarah. I want you to feel safe here, to feel like you belong. That's what we're all about. Sarah clutched the keys in her hand, their metal edges pressing into her palm. When was the last time she'd held keys to anything? When was the last time she'd had a place that was hers, even temporarily? Thank you, she managed to say, though the words felt inadequate for what she was feeling. Patricia squeezed her shoulder. Go get settled. Dinner's in an hour if you'd like to join us. If not, no pressure. Take your time adjusting. Sarah climbed the stairs to her room, and closed the door behind her. She locked it, then unlocked it, then locked it again, just to prove to herself that she could. Then she sat on the bed, feeling the mattress give beneath her weight, and let herself cry. They weren't tears of sadness, exactly. They were tears of release, of relief, of grief for all the months she'd spent without this basic dignity. She cried for the Sarah who'd slept in doorways and under bridges. She cried for the Sarah who'd been mocked by teenagers who couldn't comprehend what she'd sacrificed. She cried for the Sarah who'd felt invisible and forgotten, who'd wondered if anyone would even notice if she disappeared completely. But she also cried for the Sarah who was here now, in this room, with a key and a bed and people who wanted to help. She cried because hope hurt almost as much as despair when you'd been without it for so long. Eventually the tears stopped, and Sarah wiped her face with the back of her hand. She stood and walked to the window, looking out at the garden below. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Another day ending, but this one felt different from all the days that had come before it. Sarah unpacked her backpack, laying out her meager possessions on the dresser. Her military ID and dog tags. The photograph of her unit, creased and faded. A few changes of clothes, all worn and stained. The expired medications that barely helped. A toothbrush and a half-empty travel shampoo bottle. This was everything she owned in the world, and it fit on a single dresser with room to spare. Tomorrow she'd use Angela's gift card to get some basics. Maybe some new underwear that wasn't full of holes. Some soap that didn't come from a public restroom dispenser. Maybe even a notebook and pen. She used to keep a journal during her deployments, and the thought of writing again felt appealing. A knock at the door startled her from her thoughts. "Yeah," she called. "Hi, I'm Maya, from room 4, a voice called through the door. "Just wanted to introduce myself and let you know dinner's in 15 minutes if you want to come down." Sarah opened the door to find a woman about her age, Hispanic, with warm brown eyes and a welcoming smile. She wore jeans and a Marines t-shirt, and there was an ease to her posture that spoke of someone who was comfortable in this space. "I'm Sarah," she said, returning the smile tentatively. "Welcome to Haven House," Maya said. "I've been here for 3 months, so if you have any questions about how things work, just ask. We're all in this together, you know?" "Thank you. I might take you up on that." "Cool. Come down when you're ready. Patricia makes a mean lasagna on Wednesdays." Maya grinned and headed back down the hall. Sarah watched her go, struck by the normalcy of the interaction. Just one woman inviting another to dinner, like housemates anywhere. No judgment, no pity, just casual welcome. She changed into the cleanest shirt she had and headed downstairs. The dining room was filling up with women, her housemates, she realized. They ranged in age from early 20s to late 40s, a diverse group that shared only their veteran status and their current circumstances. Patricia was setting out platters of lasagna and garlic bread, and the smell made Sarah's stomach clench with hunger. When was the last time she'd had a home-cooked meal? She couldn't even remember. "Sarah, come sit," Maya called, patting the chair next to her. "Everyone, this is Sarah. She just got here today." A chorus of hellos and welcomes greeted her. The woman across the table, older with silver-streaked hair, introduced herself as Linda. Next to her was Jasmine, who looked barely old enough to have served. At the far end sat 3 more women whose names Sarah tried to commit to memory. As they ate, conversation flowed easily. The women talked about their days, job interviews and therapy appointments and frustrations with the VA. They complained about the shared bathroom schedule and debated what to watch for movie night on Friday. They were just women, living their lives, supporting each other through difficult circumstances. Sarah mostly listened, taking it all in. She'd forgotten what it felt like to be part of a community, to sit at a table with others and share a meal. The military had provided that once, the sense of belonging to something larger than yourself. She'd lost that when she lost everything else. Maybe she was finding it again here. Sarah woke the next morning to sunlight streaming through her window and, for a confused moment, didn't know where she was. Then memory returned, Haven House, her room, the dinner with her housemates. She sat up slowly, testing the reality of it all. The bed was still here. The dresser with her few possessions was still here. The door with her key still locked from the inside. It was real. She checked the bathroom schedule posted in the hallway and found she had the 7 o'clock slot. The bathroom was clean and well maintained, with shelves where each resident had space for their toiletries. Sarah took a long, hot shower, luxuriating in the privacy and the unlimited hot water. She washed her hair twice, scrubbing away months of street grime. When she emerged, she felt more human than she had in half a year. Breakfast was a casual affair, cereal and toast and fruit set out in the kitchen for residents to help themselves. Sarah made herself coffee and sat at the table with Maya and Jasmine, who were debating the merits of online college courses versus in-person classes. Morning, Sarah, Patricia said, poking her head into the kitchen. Rebecca's here for your case management meeting. Whenever you're ready, we're in the office. Sarah gulped down the rest of her coffee and headed to the small office off the living room. Rebecca was younger than she expected, maybe early 30s, with curly red hair and an open, friendly face. She stood to shake Sarah's hand. Sarah Mitchell, it's great to meet you. I'm Rebecca Walsh, and I'll be your case manager during your time here. Angela Torres sent over your file and gave me a heads up about your situation. How was your first night? Good, Sarah said, and meant it. Really good. I actually slept. That's huge, Rebecca said, her smile genuine. Sleep is often the first thing to come back when people get into stable housing. Your body can finally relax, you know? Stop being in constant survival mode. They spent the next hour going over Sarah's goals and needs. Rebecca explained how case management worked at Haven House, weekly meetings to check in on progress, coordination with various service providers, advocacy when systems got complicated or unresponsive. Angela's already got the wheels turning on your disability claim and your HUD VASH application, Rebecca said, making notes on her tablet. That's great. What I want to focus on is your immediate stability and your health. Dr. Patel, the mental health navigator, wants to meet with you next week. In the meantime, I've got you an appointment with a primary care physician who specializes in veteran health. That's tomorrow at 10. That fast? Sarah asked, surprised. We have partnerships with providers who reserve slots for Haven House residents. It's one of the benefits of the program. Now, let's talk about your TBI and PTSD symptoms. What's your current treatment plan? Sarah laughed, but there was no humor in it. I don't have one, really. The VA prescribes some medications, but they don't help much. I was supposed to be in therapy, but the waiting list was 6 months long. Rebecca frowned, typing something. Okay, that changes with Dr. Patel's involvement. She'll get you connected with a therapist who understands combat trauma. Probably EMDR or cognitive processing therapy, both have good success rates with PTSD. For the TBI, we'll get you a full neurological workup. The migraines especially, there are better treatment options now. They discussed Sarah's employment history and her difficulties holding jobs due to her symptoms. Rebecca didn't judge, didn't make her feel inadequate. Instead, she strategized. We're not going to push employment right away, she said. First priority is getting you stable, housed, healthy, managing your symptoms. Once that foundation is solid, we can look at vocational rehabilitation, maybe some job training that accommodates your limitations. The goal isn't to force you back into the workforce before you're ready. The goal is to build a sustainable life. Sarah felt tears prickling at her eyes again. How many times had she been made to feel like a failure for not being able to work? How many intake workers and case managers had implied that she just wasn't trying hard enough? Rebecca's approach was different. It recognized that healing came first, that you couldn't build on a broken foundation. I used to be good at things, Sarah said quietly. I was a ranger. I was strong and capable and reliable. Now I can't even hold down a basic job without falling apart. Rebecca leaned forward, her expression intense. Sarah, you're still all those things. You're still strong, look at what you've survived. You're still capable, you got yourself here, you asked for help, you're fighting to rebuild. And you're still reliable, you're showing up for yourself even when it's hard. The difference is that you're fighting a different battle now, one that requires different skills. Give yourself credit for that. Sarah nodded, not trusting herself to speak. Here's what I want you to focus on for the next few weeks, Rebecca continued. 1. Attending your medical appointments and being honest about your symptoms. 2. Participating in the house community, meals, activities, whatever feels comfortable. 3. Working with Dr. Patel to get into therapy. That's it. No pressure to have everything figured out, no timeline for getting better. Just those 3 things. Can you do that? Yes, Sarah said. I can do that. Good. Now, practical stuff. Angela gave you a grocery gift card, right? I want you to use that today. Get whatever you need to feel comfortable here. The house provides basics, but having your own things, your own shampoo, your own snacks, whatever, makes a difference. It's about reclaiming some autonomy. After the meeting, Sarah took the bus to the grocery store near Haven House. It was strange to walk through the aisles with actual money to spend, strange to choose items based on preference rather than pure survival. She bought toiletries, real shampoo and conditioner, a good bar of soap, a toothbrush that wasn't travel-sized. She bought underwear and socks, a package of t-shirts, a hoodie that didn't have holes. She bought food, granola bars for when she got hungry between meals, herbal tea that might help her sleep, ingredients to make a simple pasta dish. At the checkout, she hesitated before adding one more item, a journal and a pack of pens. Writing had helped her process things during her deployments. Maybe it would help now. Back at Haven House, Sarah put away her purchases with a sense of satisfaction. The dresser that had looked so empty last night now held her new clothes. The bathroom shelf had her toiletries arranged neatly. Small things, but they mattered. They were evidence that she was building something, however slowly. She spent the afternoon in the garden, journaling in the weak November sunlight. At first, the words came haltingly, her hand unused to forming letters after months of disuse. But gradually, they began to flow. She wrote about Afghanistan, about the friends she'd lost, about the person she used to be. She wrote about the streets, about the cold and fear and crushing loneliness. She wrote about Jake and his friends, about the moment everything had shifted. And she wrote about hope, fragile and terrifying, but real nonetheless. Maya found her there as the sun was setting. Hey, we're doing movie night tonight instead of Friday because half the house has appointments tomorrow. Want to join? Sarah looked up from her journal. What are you watching? We're voting between a comedy and an action movie. Probably the comedy will win, we all need some laughs. Come on, it'll be fun. Sarah closed her journal and stood. Okay. Yeah, I'll come. The living room was crowded with women sprawled on couches and floor cushions, debating movie choices with the kind of passionate intensity usually reserved for more important matters. Sarah settled into a corner of the couch, and Jasmine handed her a bowl of popcorn. Here, you're sharing with me. I made extra butter. They ended up watching a ridiculous comedy that had everyone laughing, the kind of genuine, from-the-belly laughter that Sarah had forgotten was possible. She found herself relaxing, participating in the commentary and jokes, feeling like part of the group. This was what healing looked like, she realized. Not some dramatic transformation, but small moments of normalcy strung together. A shared meal. A stupid movie. Laughter with people who understood, at least in part, what you'd been through. Later that night, back in her room with the door locked and the curtains drawn, Sarah lay in bed and thought about the path ahead. It wouldn't be easy, Rebecca had been clear about that. There would be setbacks and frustrations, days when the PTSD made it hard to get out of bed, days when the migraines made everything impossible. But she had resources now. She had advocates. She had a community of women who were fighting the same battle, and she had a place that was safe, at least for now. It was more than she'd had in a long time. It was enough to build on. The next few weeks at Haven House fell into a rhythm that was both comforting and challenging. Sarah attended her medical appointments, finally getting comprehensive care for her TBI and PTSD. The neurologist adjusted her migraine medication, prescribing something that actually helped reduce the frequency and intensity of her headaches. Her primary care physician ran blood work and discovered she was severely deficient in several vitamins. Months of inadequate nutrition had taken their toll. Dr. Patel, the mental health navigator, was as good as everyone had promised. She was a small Indian woman with a no-nonsense attitude and genuine compassion. She got Sarah connected with a therapist who specialized in combat trauma, a former Army psychologist who understood military culture and didn't need things explained. Therapy was brutal. Sarah had spent months pushing down her memories, avoiding her trauma, just trying to survive. Now she was being asked to confront it all, to process the things she'd seen and done, to grieve for the person she'd been and the friends she'd lost. There were sessions where she sobbed so hard she couldn't breathe, sessions where rage filled her until she wanted to break things, sessions where numbness settled over her like a blanket and she couldn't feel anything at all. But slowly, incrementally, it was helping. She started sleeping better, the nightmares becoming less frequent. The hypervigilance that had her jumping at every loud noise began to ease, though it never fully went away. She learned coping strategies for when the PTSD symptoms flared up, ways to ground herself when flashbacks threatened to pull her under. Rebecca checked in weekly, monitoring her progress and adjusting the plan as needed. The disability claim was moving forward, Angela had managed to get it expedited, and they were cautiously optimistic about approval. The HUD VASH application was more complicated, but there was movement there too. Sarah also grew closer to her housemates, particularly Maya and Linda. Maya was working toward becoming a paralegal, taking online classes while working part-time at a veteran service organization. Linda, the oldest resident at 46, had served in the Gulf War and was dealing with health issues from burn pit exposure. They became Sarah's support system, the people she could talk to when things got hard. One evening about a month into her stay, Sarah was helping with dinner prep when Patricia came into the kitchen with an unexpected announcement. "Sarah, you have a visitor. He's in the living room." Sarah's heart sank. She didn't have any visitors. Her family had cut ties years ago, unable to cope with her struggles. The few friends she'd had before deployment had long since moved on. "Who is it?" He said his name is Jake. "A teenage boy. He seems nervous but insistent about seeing you." Jake. The kid from that day on the street, the one who'd seen her tattoo and left her money. Sarah wiped her hands on a dish towel, confused and curious. "Okay. I'll see him." Jake was standing in the middle of the living room, looking profoundly out of place. He wore jeans and a nice sweater, and his hands were shoved deep in his pockets. When Sarah entered, his head snapped up, and relief flooded his face. "Sarah." "Hi. I wasn't sure I'd find you." "How did you find me?" Sarah asked, keeping her distance. She wasn't afraid of him, he was just a kid, but she was wary of his intentions. "It took some work," Jake admitted. "I went back to that corner where we met. You weren't there, so I asked around. Eventually, I found someone who knew you'd gotten into a program. I called a bunch of veteran housing organizations until someone finally told me you might be here. They wouldn't confirm it, but I took a chance." "Why?" Sarah asked. "Why go to all that trouble?" Jake's expression crumpled slightly. "Because I've been thinking about what happened that day ever since. About how I treated you, the assumptions I made. I needed to apologize properly, not just throw money at you and run away. And I wanted to know if you were okay." Sarah studied him for a long moment. He seemed genuinely remorseful, but she'd learned to be cautious about people's motivations. "I'm doing better," she said finally. "I'm getting help." "I'm glad," Jake said, and he sounded like he meant it. "I'm really glad. Look, I know this is weird, me showing up here. But that day changed something for me. I realized how ignorant I was, how sheltered. I've been doing research on veteran homelessness and PTSD, trying to understand. It's really messed up, what happens to veterans when they come home." "It is," Sarah agreed. "I also want to apologize to you face to face. What I did, what I said, it was cruel and ignorant. You served our country and you deserve respect, not mockery. I'm sorry. Truly sorry." Sarah felt something loosen in her chest. She'd carried anger about that encounter, about being reduced to entertainment for bored teenagers. Hearing his apology, seeing his genuine remorse, helped ease that burden. "Thank you," she said. "I appreciate you saying that, and I appreciate you taking the time to educate yourself. A lot of people wouldn't bother." Jake nodded, looking relieved. "I brought you something. I hope this isn't weird." He pulled out an envelope from his jacket pocket and handed it to her. Inside was a check made out to her for $500. Sarah's eyes widened. "Jake, I can't accept this." "Please," he said quickly. "My parents give me an allowance and I've been saving it." I told them what happened, the real version, not the video I took, and they were horrified. They wanted to help too. This isn't charity or pity. It's wanting to make things right, even a little bit. Sarah held the check, torn between pride and practicality. $500 could cover so many things: new clothes, a deposit on permanent housing when she was ready, a cushion for emergencies. But accepting it felt like validating his guilt, like making herself responsible for his emotional growth. "What happened to the video you took?" she asked. Jake had the grace to look ashamed. "I deleted it that night. Never posted it anywhere. I told my friends to delete their copies too, and as far as I know, they did." "Why are you really here, Jake?" Sarah asked, not unkindly. "Is this about making yourself feel better? About assuaging your guilt?" He considered the question seriously. "Maybe partly. But also because I think you deserve support, and if I can help, I want to. You don't have to forgive me. You don't have to like me. But please take this money and use it for whatever you need." Sarah made a decision. "I'll accept it on one condition. You volunteer some of your time at a veteran organization. Not because I'm telling you to, but because if you really care about this issue, you should be part of the solution." Jake's face lit up. "I'd like that. I was already thinking about it, actually. There's a veteran food bank that needs volunteers." "That's a good start," Sarah said. She tucked the check into her pocket. "Thank you, Jake. This is generous, and I will use it wisely. Can I ask how you're doing? I mean, if it's not too personal." Sarah considered what to share. "I'm in transitional housing. I'm getting medical care and therapy. I have advocates helping me navigate the system. I'm applying for permanent housing through a veteran program. It's slow, and it's not easy, but I'm making progress." "That's great," Jake said, his smile genuine. "That's really great. I'm glad you're getting the help you deserve." They talked for a few more minutes, the conversation easier now. Jake told her about his plans for college, his growing interest in social work or veteran advocacy. Sarah found herself advising him, suggesting things to study and organizations to learn about. It was strange, this role reversal, but not unpleasant. When Jake left, Maya emerged from where she'd been discreetly listening in the dining room. "So that's the kid who gave you the money?" "That's him. He seems like a good kid. Privileged and naive, but willing to learn. That's something." "It is," Sarah agreed. She pulled out the check and looked at it again. $500. It wouldn't solve all her problems, but it would help. And more than the money, Jake's visit had given her something else, validation that her story mattered, that her service and sacrifice weren't forgotten or invisible to everyone. That night, Sarah added another entry to her journal. She wrote about forgiveness, not just for Jake but for herself. She wrote about the unexpected ways that healing came, through community and therapy and medication and kind gestures from unlikely sources. She wrote about the person she was becoming, scarred but stronger, broken but rebuilding. The path forward was still uncertain. The disability claim could be approved or denied. The housing application could take months or years. Her symptoms could improve or plateau or worsen. But for the first time since that IED blast had changed everything, Sarah felt like she had some control over her narrative, some agency in her own story. She was more than her trauma. More than her circumstances. More than a cardboard sign on a rainy street corner. She was a veteran, a survivor, a woman rebuilding her life one day at a time. And that was enough. 3 months after arriving at Haven House, Sarah stood in an empty apartment, keys in hand, and tried to comprehend that this space was hers. The HUD VASH voucher had finally come through, and after weeks of apartment hunting with Rebecca's help, she'd found this studio in the Columbia City neighborhood. It wasn't fancy, just one room with a kitchenette, a small bathroom, and windows that overlooked a busy street, but it was hers. Her name was on the lease. Her key opened the door. After everything, she had a home. What do you think? Rebecca asked, standing in the doorway with a smile. I think it's perfect, Sarah said, her voice thick with emotion. The apartment was unfurnished, but that would come. The Veteran Advocacy Network had connected her with a furniture bank that provided basics for veterans transitioning into housing. A bed, a small table, a chair, some kitchen supplies, it would arrive tomorrow. Jake's $500, combined with her newly approved disability compensation, had allowed her to buy sheets, towels, dishes, and other essentials. She'd actually gone shopping for her own home, picking out things based on what she liked rather than what she could afford or what was being given away. The disability claim had been approved at 70%, which meant a monthly check that, combined with the housing voucher, made life sustainable. It wasn't wealth, but it was stability. It was the difference between surviving and living. Maya had helped her pack up her belongings at Haven House that morning. It had been bittersweet, leaving the place that had been her refuge, leaving the community that had supported her through the hardest parts of recovery. But it was time. She was ready. Remember, you're not alone in this transition, Rebecca said. I'll still check in weekly for the first few months. Dr. Patel is continuing your care coordination. Your therapist has you scheduled for ongoing sessions. You have a support system. I know, Sarah said. I'm not the same person who ended up on the streets 6 months ago. I know how to ask for help now. I know I can't do everything alone. Rebecca gave her a hug, something she rarely did with clients, but Sarah had become more than a case file to her. You've done amazing work, Sarah. I'm proud of you. After Rebecca left, Sarah sat on the floor of her empty apartment and just breathed. The silence was different from the silence of the streets. It wasn't threatening or lonely. It was peaceful. This was her space, her sanctuary, and she could fill it however she chose. Her phone rang, and she smiled when she saw the caller ID. Hey, Maya. How's the new place? Have you christened it yet by ordering pizza and eating it on the floor? Sarah laughed. Not yet, but that's not a bad idea. Linda and I want to come by tomorrow after the furniture arrives. Help you set up, maybe bring a housewarming gift. That cool? That would be great, Sarah said, warmth flooding through her. The bonds she'd formed at Haven House weren't ending just because she'd moved out. She had friends now, people who understood her journey because they were on similar ones. That evening, Sarah walked to the grocery store, her grocery store now, the one in her neighborhood where she'd shop regularly. She bought ingredients for a simple dinner and a bottle of sparkling cider to celebrate. Back in the apartment, she cooked on her own stove for the first time in months, the smell of garlic and herbs filling the space and making it feel more like home. As she ate her pasta sitting on the floor by the window, watching the city lights come on as darkness fell, Sarah thought about the journey that had brought her here. The deployments to Afghanistan that had given her purpose and taken so much in return. The IED blast that had changed everything. The long, agonizing slide into homelessness when the system failed her. The cold nights on the streets, wondering if she'd see another morning. The encounter with Jake and his friends that had somehow been a turning point. The advocates who'd fought for her when she couldn't fight for herself. The community at Haven House that had shown her she wasn't alone. All of it had led to this moment, to this quiet evening in her own apartment, safe and stable and healing. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. She opened it and smiled. It was from Jake. Hey Sarah, hope this isn't weird. Just wanted to check in. I've been volunteering at the Veteran Food Bank like you suggested. It's been really eye-opening. How are you doing? She typed back, not weird at all. I'm good. Just moved into my own apartment today, actually. Glad you're volunteering, that work matters. Keep it up. The response came quickly, that's amazing. Congratulations. You deserve it. Sarah set the phone down and returned to her pasta. Jake had kept his word, had continued educating himself and contributing. He'd grown from that encounter, which was the best outcome she could have hoped for. And more than that, he'd helped her remember her own worth, had been the catalyst for her to start fighting again instead of just surviving. Over the next few weeks, Sarah settled into her new life. The furniture arrived, and Maya and Linda helped her arrange it, turning the empty studio into a functional living space. Sarah hung curtains, soft gray ones that blocked the streetlights at night. She put up a few decorations, including a framed copy of her unit photo and her military awards. They were part of her history, part of who she was, and she didn't need to hide them anymore. She established routines, the kind of normal daily patterns that most people took for granted but that felt revolutionary to her. Morning coffee while watching the sunrise through her window. Therapy appointments on Tuesday afternoons. Grocery shopping on Thursdays. Weekly dinners with Maya and Linda, rotating between their apartments. Slow walks through the neighborhood, getting to know the streets and shops and rhythms of her new community. The PTSD and TBI symptoms didn't disappear, they likely never would completely. There were still bad days when migraines kept her in bed or when flashbacks made it hard to leave the apartment. But they were becoming less frequent, less severe. And more importantly, she had tools now to manage them, strategies to cope, people to call when things got hard. Sarah also started thinking about the future beyond just stability. Rebecca had suggested vocational rehabilitation, and Sarah was considering it. She'd never be able to do physically demanding work, and jobs with high stress or unpredictable environments were probably out. But there were things she could do. She'd always been good with logistics and planning, skills from her Ranger days that transferred to civilian life. Maybe something in that field, or maybe advocacy work like Angela and Rebecca did, helping other veterans navigate the system. She didn't have to decide immediately. For now, it was enough to just be stable, to work on her health, to build a foundation for whatever came next. One Saturday morning about 2 months after moving into her apartment, Sarah was drinking coffee and reading when someone knocked on her door. She checked the peephole, a safety habit that would probably never leave her, and was surprised to see Patricia Chen from Haven House. "Patricia," Sarah said, opening the door. "This is a surprise. Come in." Patricia entered, looking around the apartment with approval. "This is lovely, Sarah. You've made it very homey." "Thank you. What brings you by?" Patricia settled into the chair Sarah offered. "I have a proposition for you. As you know, part of Haven House's model is peer support, residents helping each other, sharing their experiences and wisdom. We've found that women who've successfully transitioned out often make excellent peer mentors for current residents. You've been on quite a journey, and I think you'd have a lot to offer women who are where you were a few months ago." Sarah was taken aback. "You want me to be a mentor?" "If you're interested. It would be informal at first, maybe coming by once a week to have dinner, talk with residents, share your story if you're comfortable. Eventually, if it works out, it could develop into a more formal peer support role. We could even pay a small stipend." Sarah thought about it. The idea of helping others, of giving back to the program that had saved her life, was appealing. And she had learned so much through her experience, about navigating the VA, about recovery, about not giving up even when everything seemed hopeless. "I'd like that," she said. "I'd like that a lot." "Wonderful. We can start next week if that works for you." "And Sarah? This isn't just about what you can give to them. It's also about your continued healing. Helping others, being part of a community, sharing your story, it's all part of the recovery process." After Patricia left, Sarah returned to her coffee, but her mind was racing with possibilities. A few months ago, she'd been sleeping on sidewalks, invisible to the world, wondering if anyone would even notice if she disappeared. Now she had an apartment, a support system, and the opportunity to help others who were struggling the way she had struggled. It wasn't the life she'd imagined when she'd enlisted at 19, full of idealism and dreams of serving her country. It wasn't the life she'd expected when she'd earned her Ranger tab and proved she could do anything the men could do. But it was a good life, built from the ruins of what came before, and it was authentically hers. Sarah walked to her window and looked out at the city spreading before her. Somewhere out there, there were other veterans struggling, other people fighting battles that society couldn't or wouldn't see. There were caseworkers and advocates and volunteers working tirelessly to help. And now she would be part of that effort, using her pain and experience to light the way for others. She thought about the cardboard sign she'd sat with on that rainy corner, the one that said "Homeless Veteran." Anything helps. She'd thrown it away when she moved into Haven House, but she remembered every rain-smeared word. That sign had been her truth then, but it wasn't her truth anymore. Now her truth was resilience. Recovery. Community. Purpose. Sarah pulled out her journal and began to write, documenting this new chapter of her story. She wrote about second chances and the power of advocacy. She wrote about the importance of asking for help and the strength it took to accept it. She wrote about transformation, not from broken to fixed, but from surviving to thriving, from invisible to seen, from isolated to connected. And she wrote about hope, not the fragile, desperate hope of her first nights at Haven House, but a stronger, steadier kind of hope built on evidence and experience. The hope that came from knowing she'd climbed out of the deepest darkness and could help others do the same. The tattoo on her shoulder, the Ranger scroll and the words "Rangers lead the way," had felt like a cruel joke when she was on the streets. But now it felt true again, just in a different context. She was leading the way, not through enemy territory, but through the complex landscape of recovery and reintegration. She was proving that it was possible to fall all the way down and still find a way back up. Her phone buzzed with a text from Maya. "Dinner at my place tonight? Linda's coming and I'm making enchiladas." Sarah smiled and typed back, "I'll be there. Can I bring anything?" "Just yourself," came the reply. Just herself. Once upon a time, Sarah hadn't thought that would be enough. She'd thought she needed to be the person she was before Afghanistan, before the IED, before the trauma. She thought she needed to be strong and unbreakable and independent, needing no one and nothing. But she'd learned that strength came in different forms. That asking for help was brave, not weak. That community was essential, not optional. That the person she was now, scarred but healing, broken but rebuilding, changed but whole, was exactly who she needed to be. Sarah closed her journal and got ready to go to Maya's apartment. As she locked her door behind her door, to her apartment, in her building, she felt a profound sense of gratitude. For the advocates who'd fought for her. For the community that had supported her. For the system that, despite its flaws, had eventually come through. For Jake, whose moment of compassion had helped reignite her will to fight. For every person who'd seen her as a human being worthy of dignity and care. But most of all, she felt grateful for herself, for the part of her that had refused to give up, that had survived when survival seemed impossible, that had held on to the smallest ember of hope even in the darkest nights. The streets of Seattle stretched before her, no longer a maze of danger and desperation but a city full of possibility. Sarah walked with her head high, a veteran who'd served her country and was now serving her community, a woman who'd been knocked down but had gotten back up, a survivor who'd become a thriver. The journey wasn't over. Recovery was ongoing, and there would be challenges ahead. But Sarah Mitchell was ready for them. She'd been a ranger once, trained to overcome impossible odds. Now she was something even more important, a veteran who'd found her way home, and who was helping light the path for others to do the same. As she walked through the evening streets toward her friends, toward dinner and laughter and connection, Sarah realized that this was what victory looked like. Not medals or commendations, not dramatic rescues or heroic battles, but quiet moments of peace, stable housing, supportive relationships, and the opportunity to make a difference. She'd survived the war in Afghanistan. She'd survived the war of homelessness and bureaucratic indifference. And now she was building something better, not just for herself, but for the community of veterans who would come after her, who would need the same support and advocacy and refusal to give up. Rangers lead the way, her tattoo declared. And that's exactly what Sarah Mitchell was doing. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.